changed some parts locally. They just upgraded some stuff apparently, which I think is just the code word for like we have terrible internet and we're just gonna lie to you. That's what they said in our area. They just changed some stuff around, so that's probably why both of our internet has been not that great.
Yeah. And what is going on, everybody? This is, of course, your boy Bernie here, along with Pete.
What's up?
And today, guys, I do apologize if you're going to hear a lot of background noise in my area. I actually had to move because we're cleaning the carpets today, so it's going to be a little bit louder than normal. But nevertheless, we are still promised you guys a stream today. I posted it on the internet, and when I post something on the internet, that means it's true. So before we do get started, I just wanted to kind of talk about Bill Russell really quick. Again, I'm not trying to capitalize off anything from Bill Russell. Here's what I'll say about Bill Russell, the man that he was, from 1934 to 2022, lived a long life. I think he was 88 years old. Not only, I think the Celtic stuff aside, the champions, I think he has 13 in total, including player and coach. But besides all that stuff, guys, the biggest thing that I want you guys to remember about Bill Russell was kind of how much of a civil rights leader he was. He was such ahead of his time. Him, Ali, Jim Brown, MLK for sure. I mean, all those guys paved the way, really for people like me, mixed race, to able to kind of exist. And so I do appreciate what he's done for not only just me and my existence, but also just what's for the people out there that were struggling during these times and fighting for what they deserved. And so, rest in peace to a legend, not only on the court, but especially off the court with all that he did. I don't know if you want to say anything, Pete.
I just couldn't agree more. I mean, we texted about it right when we heard the news. I mean, there's one thing to be said about celebrating the man as a basketball player. I mean, I don't think people understand how dominant Bill Russell was as a player. Like, 11 championships in 13 years will never be done again in any professional sport in our lifetimes. It will never happen again, in my opinion. Beyond just that, like you said, though, even more importantly, what the man did off the court. I mean, he is literally one of the all-time greats as far as progressing civil rights in this country, and he's an American hero as far as I'm concerned. RIP to a legend, and, sad day, but a day to celebrate a legacy in not only the league, but sports in general.
Yeah, for sure. And sorry, I have to keep going on mute, off mute, just to make sure the sound isn't too, or the loudness isn't too crazy. The other thing I kind of want to say about him really quick before we kind of move on, again, also was a pioneer for the NBA as well. I mean, you think about the contracts that these people are on right now. You think about what they were able to do for everybody. I mean, I'm just so extremely grateful to have heard the history and witnessed some things. Obviously, I wasn't born during during that time, but it's an amazing to kind of hear the stories and kind of reconnect with a guy that, again, legend, not only for the city of Boston, only for the Boston Celtics, but also just for the modern NBA as well. But with that being said, let's kind of move on to more of a lighter topic today. And so today, everybody, here's what we're going to be talking about. I have a rundown list of kind of the topics that we're going to do today. Obviously, we talked about a little bit about Bill Russell again. Don't want to go too crazy with it, but again, RIP the legend. We're going with the NBA tampering investigations. Of course, now we have two teams officially in the tampering bubble, or however you want to phrase it. We got the New York Knicks and the 76ers kind of in that situation. And then I thought we'd talk about a very interesting topic that I think both Pete and I are on the opposite ends of, and that's the salary cap discussion. Just kind of thinking about that more so as contracts continue to get higher and higher in the NBA, especially for players that, think are more so of a 2 or 3, but are getting paid like a 1. And so I kind of want to discuss, why that is and, kind of talk about that situation. And then, of course, we're going to talk about Colin Sexton. There's some rumors that, he wants $20 million a year, which kind of leads right into our salary cap discussion. And then to kind of end the show, we got a Zion fat clause. There's a Zion weight clause that is going to be happening for Zion Williamson in terms of how he'll get his money, if he'll get his money. And so that's kind of what we're going to be doing here today on the charge. So without further ado, let's get right into the news. Okay, on our first story of the day, and of course we have two of them. That is, of course, the NBA opens investigation into potential tampering committed by the Knicks on Jalen Brunson. I know Pete's shaking in his boots right now. He might be losing Brunson on a free. Just kidding, he probably won't be. But the story goes on to say that the NBA has opened an investigation into possibly tampering committed by the Knicks and their signing of Jalen Brunson. Brunson, of course, left the Mavericks on a 4-year, $104 million with the Knicks. Brunson has a lot of ties with the Knicks between his father, Rick Brunson, who's an assistant coach, as long as Leon Rose, who's a lifelong friend. And of course, I think that's what sparked the tampering charges there. And then, of course, to kind of also talk about the 76ers, they also opened to a violation committed by the Philadelphia 76ers on the grounds of signing James Harden, PJ Tucker, and Daniel House. Harden obviously declined his contract so he could get a more team-friendly deal for them. And some are wondering if Harden has another deal in place for the future, which would violate league rules. So, Pete, I know I talked a bunch. I just kind of talked really quickly about kind of the stories and what's been going on. What do you think is the biggest talking point when it comes to these tampering rules? And really, do you think that anything's going to happen to these organizations?
I mean, it's what we always talk about, right? I think like that's why it doesn't bother me, or it doesn't really worry me, is what I should say. Like the NBA has run these tampering investigations over the last, 5, 10 years. Given, I'm gonna try and think of the word I'm trying to say here, but it's given teams like, I guess you'd use the word like the foresight to know they're not really going to get in very much trouble, right? Like they can kind of weigh what it's worth. Like the Knicks with Brunson in particular, like he was so obviously tampered with, whatever that means in the NBA's definition of what tampering is. They clearly tampered with him, right? They hired his dad right before the agency even started. It was a done deal. He didn't even take that meeting with Dallas because he had already practically signed on the dotted line before free agency had even opened. So I think what it comes down to is until the NBA either decides, A, this is a bigger deal and we need to punish teams accordingly, or B, they just keep doing it the way it is. Why would any team really worry about it? It really depends on the player you're trying to sign. And I would argue if you're the Knicks, and I'm not saying, we've never really talked too in depth about the Brunson signing and the crazy range of expectations with a player like Brunson getting signed to the deal he did. But I would argue that signing Brunson is at least worth giving up your second round pick, right? Like some second round pick. Like it's not that big of a loss.
Yeah.
And that is that's pretty much all we've seen. Have we ever seen a harsher punishment than a second round pick being taken away?
So far, no, and I'm curious to see if the owners and the league office are gonna. I think this is gonna be the true test for them as we continue to move on, because it seems like tampering charges will never go away, right? People are gonna continue to commit them. People are gonna continue to say, "Oh, well, I didn't really know," and things like that. And so, in my opinion, I think the only way that you really stop it from the owner's perspective is you have to come down with a harsh punishment. You can't. And again, I think for most part, what and it goes to your point too. It's like you treat it as if it's kind of like a low level offense anyway. So why even punish these teams for making those type of commitments in the first place anyway? I understand you want it to be the integrity of every team has an opportunity to talk to you. Every team has an opportunity to kind of get to know you before you do secretly things behind the backs of others. But at the same time, I don't see really how things are going to change if they continue to make it a low level offense. And like I said, if they really want to, really be hard on it, the best way to do it is by making a very harsh punishment. Maybe you say, "Sorry, Brunson, you thought you were going to the Knicks. Nah, you're gonna stay a free agent, and now you got to re-sign with somebody else." And then it becomes a whole legality of it. I'm not sure what the implications of that would be. Like, does it make it a null and void contract then? If you're tampering with, like, if they find out that you're tampering, that's the biggest question mark for me as we continue to see these players continue to have these tampering charges. What happens to them? Because again, that's a lot of money to be messed with, right? You don't want to mess with someone's money because then you could get sued that way. So I think to me that's the question mark for the NBA. And before you talk, Pete, I just have I apologize that I cannot read your name. But your message says soon the European Championship for the national teams in basketball. The favorites won Slovenia, France, Serbia, Greece, Lithuania. All European stars in the NBA are coming to play. Hey, we are big stands of the European basketball movement. At least I am.
Talking about it for years. I mean,
Yeah.
we've been on it for years. I mean, we've seen the writing on the wall. Like these dudes, basketball is a world sport now. Yeah, it 100% is.
Yep.
And we could get into a deeper conversation of like the American way of raising up these young players and the toll it takes on them, and the skill set developed. Like it is different. We're seeing a revolution in terms of European basketball.
Yeah.
But it's pretty interesting. Going back to the tampering though, like my opinion, I don't think they'll ever make as harsh a punishment as that. Like
I don't think so
just
either.
saying you're off the team. There's no way they can get away with that, just in the sense that all of, like you said, the legality that it opens up in terms of the NBA, the contract for the player, the age, everything. It just makes it such a mess. I don't think they would ever do that. I think really what it comes down to, and maybe this is the NBA's perspective, tampering is one thing, right? Like it basically just amounts to you're talking to a player before free agency is open, right? It doesn't necessarily, and maybe this is, other people would have a different opinion. I don't necessarily think tampering really changes the teams that these players would go to. You know what I mean? Like Jalen Brunson, regardless if they had tampered with him, in my opinion, they could have hired his dad, and it's not tampering, right?
Yeah.
The connection to Leon Rose and Worldwide Wes and Tom Thibodeau and Derrick Rose and all these connections Jalen Brunson has to the Knicks, they all existed of tampering, right? So the question is, if we punish this team super hard for tampering, does that really change anything? Would he have gone somewhere else? And the question is probably not. Like, I don't really think so. Just in the mere sense, and let's go away from just the Knicks in particular, right? We have forever heard of like free agency destinations. That's been a buzzword in all sports forever, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is a free agency destination? And it basically boils down to big markets, well-known teams with legacy, or just in general nice cities, right? Tampering doesn't necessarily affect what those markets are that are going to bring in free agents, in my opinion. I think it might influence into a specific market maybe a little earlier than otherwise. It's basically just like a slight head start on another team. So I don't know, maybe that's the question. Maybe you come up with some punishment to say, we're going to slow you down in some other facet of the business, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the answer, because really tampering, I don't really know if it's that big of a deal. I really don't. Like, these teams do it all the time, no matter what. They all do it. So I think it's kind of even hard to determine what tampering's effect on the league actually is. Like, it's probably always existed, and it probably always will, regardless of the punishment. You cannot stop people from talking to their friends, talking to loved ones with other organizations. You can't do that. Tampering is always going to be a thing. If anything, maybe you have to change the stigma attached to what tampering is. Maybe you have to try and rework like what tampering actually is and how it affects the league into a way that is not so negative, because I actually think like a lot of the negativity surrounding the word tampering is made by the NBA. I think they make that a bigger issue than it needs to be. It's going to exist regardless. That's kind of why I've always thought like tampering is what it is. It's going to exist. It's more a matter of how publicly facing we're going to tamper with players, right? Because like that's the biggest issue, I think. When you have like LeBron is basically recruiting a new GM to his city in the middle of All-Star weekend, right? He's trying to get Sam Presti to come to the Lakers and replace Rob Pelinka, right?
Yeah.
That is about as tampering as you can get. And it's publicly facing. He's doing it in a press conference. I mean, what does that really do, though? It doesn't really mean anything. He's just saying,
Hmm.
I like Sam Presti and I'd prefer him as my GM. If anything, that's hurting his team.
Yeah.
I actually think a lot of the times tampering is like a double-edged sword. Like it kind of goes both ways.
Hmm.
So, I don't know, man. I'm kind of sick of tampering in a lot of ways. Like I really think it's a much bigger deal than it needs to be. It's more, I mean, it's really like, maybe these small market towns that get really upset about it. But the bigger question is, regardless of if Knicks tampered with Jalen Brunson, was Jalen Brunson going to go to Oklahoma City, right?
Hmm.
No. Was he going to go to anywhere that's a smaller market than New York City or somewhere where he was already probably destined to go from the beginning? Probably not.
Probably
Tampering
not.
didn't change that. It
No.
didn't change that. So, how harsh are we going to punish the Knicks for a decision that was made before they tampered anyway? I
Yeah.
don't know. And a lot of people would say you're being a homer, but I would say that for even my most despised teams in the NBA, I would argue that guy was probably going to go there anyway. So,
Yeah. I mean, we keep having these conversations year after year, Pete. I mean, from Lonzo Ball to Jalen Brunson to James Harden, these conversations will continue to happen because teams and players are trying to get on the same page beforehand. And again, does it suck for the teams like Oklahoma City Thunder and the Memphis Grizzlies and many of these other organizations that usually don't get those star players anyway? Unless, like I said, unless there's like even LeBron James tampered years ago, if you remember his decision, right? Whether he was going to stay in Cleveland, like they talk before the season, and
oh yeah,
the consensus was even LeBron in Cleveland doesn't guarantee the signing of Bosch and Wade. They had to go somewhere else to go do that, right? Miami was the destination at the end of the day, and so to me, these organizations, these teams are going to continue to do that because they understand that the star players don't want to play in those markets. And again, it'll probably contradict my talking point for the next topic that we'll talk about with the salary cap.
hmm
But what I will say about it is that's not how the Memphis Grizzlies built their team. That's not how the Oklahoma City Thunder are building their team. They understand where they're at in the NBA atmosphere of what was the phrase that you used last week, Pete? I guess it was timeline, but they know their role
yeah,
is
yeah.
more
Just
so
understanding the timeline. Yeah,
understanding the
they
timeline,
understand it.
understanding their role in the NBA. Maybe just maybe if you have a superstar, you could possibly bring them over, but at the end of the day, they don't want to play in those areas. They don't want to get signed over there. They're not going to listen to a pitch from the Oklahoma City Thunder, even though it's Presti. But they're not going to listen to his pitch, being like, "Okay, I know your project. You're taking way too long for where I want to be at right now. I want to win championships. I win championships by playing right now with players and teammates that are about my age to go forward for a championship." And so, like you said, Pete, they know their timelines, and I think these organizations at the end of the day understand it. I think it's just something for them to complain about because they feel like they're unheard, and I think it's more so from the owners than the GMs, and that must be a huge disconnect somewhere when they're talking to one another.
I like, and realistically, and this would be really my last point. Like, I honestly think tampering is overplayed. I really
Mm-hmm.
do. Like, it's really just only people who really care about it are the team where the player doesn't sign like original. Like, it's Dallas, right?
Yeah,
It's Dallas is upset about it, probably. That's probably who's filing complaints.
and Twitter.
Or yeah, and Twitter and small market GMs. Those are the people who care, right?
Yeah,
But even then, it wasn't gonna go to any of your places. Like the Knicks talking to them didn't matter.
yeah,
Talking to Brunson didn't matter. You could even go back to like the 70s, right? And look at Kareem requested to be traded to the Lakers. Like you're telling me there was no tampering back then in terms of the Lakers
yeah,
players reaching out to Kareem
mm-hmm.
to come play in LA. There's
Yeah,
no shot that was happening. Like wasn't happening. There's no shot. Why pretend that these guys don't talk? Why pretend? Because even then, like if you're gonna really get in depth to it, how do you solve a situation like the Knicks front office having connections to a guy like Brunson? Like
mm-hmm.
they have known that kid since he was literally a kid, like a
Mm-hmm.
young
Yeah,
child. You cannot stop that from being a thing, and they're not the only situation like that in the NBA. They're not. If anything, maybe if you lower the stigma of of tampering, what it is, and you encourage, maybe not encourage it, but maybe just like make it not as big of a deal. You can have these teams that don't get free agencies have conversations for longer amounts of time and convince these players to go places they otherwise wouldn't go. Maybe it solves the big market bias for free agencies or for free agents in general. So I really don't know. If anything, I think we need to get into our next discussion and we can kind of come back and keep talking about tampering.
Yeah, but let me quickly answer Sean's question. What tamperings have these teams been doing, like specific actions? Basically, Sean, there's a period in which during the summer you're not allowed to talk to other players, or teams aren't allowed to talk to players, players aren't allowed to talk to teams, and there's like this time period where things could get done. But in the past, we've seen a lot of these players and people really talk about kind of what they want to do. So, for example, like Lonzo, for example, talked to the Bulls before the opening free agency day about like, hey, what can the Chicago Bulls offer me as a player, and many other things of that nature. And you're not allowed to do that before the season starts. And so you need to wait until the free agency period. So there's a period in time in which, I think it's like at the end of, I think even from the start of the NBA season until free agency, you're not allowed to talk to another team or player. Like, players aren't really supposed to talk to players, but they do anyway. Or actually, I don't think that's true. Players are not allowed to talk to the teams beforehand.
Oh.
So, like, for example, if like Lonzo Ball
You
is
can do
talking
players too.
Players
Players
wow.
talking to players. That's definitely happened before. I've heard of that for sure.
Yeah, and so for example, like Lonzo Ball, if you're not allowed to, for him, he's not allowed to talk to the Bulls since the year before he became a free agent and signed with the Bulls. Like, you're not allowed to do that whatsoever. And so those are kind of the actions. Like, you're talking about contracts, probably talking about team situation. Like, hey, what are you going to do for me to form this team around me? Here's what we're doing. We're signing this, this, and this, and other things like that. But there's another question I want to ask you, Pete, and I know I don't want to go beat around a dead bush here for this topic for too long, but I was going to ask you about, and it's right here. Do we have to blame, and I have them up here on my screen, do we have to blame guys like Wojnarowski and Shams for what's going on with the tampering? Because, like you said, in the past, without Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and many other players in the 70s and 80s were probably doing this. They're probably talking to other teams, talking to teammates, saying like, hey, you should sign here. And probably had a deal in place beforehand. Like, do you feel like that's kind of the way? Do you blame these guys at all, or no?
If anything, they're a byproduct of a system that's been around way before they existed. Like I said, I really think tampering, whatever tampering is supposed to mean by NBA standards and by these other, leagues, tampering has and always will exist in sports as long as people can talk to each other. It will exist because even your description of tampering, like, such a loose and fluid thing, whatever it is, right? Who knows when the Knicks started talking to Jalen Brunson? They might have literally started talking to him the minute that World Wide Wes and Leon Rose were hired by the Knicks to run the front office. That was two full seasons ago, almost 3 full seasons ago. So if we're going to take that into consideration, what even is tampering? What's a punishment for tampering? How long does it have to be before a season to even be considered tampering? Because realistically, they could have said to Jalen Brunson a season and 2-3 seasons ago, right? Because I believe Leon Rose was his agent. He could have said, hey, your contract expires in 2.5 years with the Mavericks. When it comes up, keep performing. I'm going to send you whatever the most reasonable big contract I can, and you're going to come here, right? And they agreed on it 3 seasons in advance. They could have. I'm not saying that's what happened. Could have happened, right? How can you possibly punish that? Or how can you possibly monitor that realistically? And I think that's kind of that term I just used, that double-edged sword of the NBA, right? They honestly, I believe, encourage tampering because they have guys like Woj, they have guys like Shams, and all these dudes who do a lot in terms of keeping the NBA hot topic to discuss throughout the offseason and year-round. Mm-hmm. And that's where, a few years ago, what was the big term everybody used? That basketball is becoming a 365-day-a-year sport. Right? Yeah. That was like 4 years ago that people really started talking about that.
Yeah.
Not exist without tampering.
Exactly. And really
I
quick,
yeah,
oh no,
yeah.
go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Going to say I genuinely don't believe that the NBA could advertise themselves the way they do if they didn't have tampering. We would have a significant chunk of the year where we did not have anything to talk about if there was no tampering. So that's just me. I think there are people would definitely disagree with that in the NBA. It's just
Yeah.
I think you're lying to yourself. That's where Woj and Shams and all these guys get their information. They get their
Yeah.
information from tampering that's occurring in the places and times where those discussions aren't supposed to be happening.
Yeah, and so to kind of continue, I just want to give a definition to Sean, a more, more accurate, more like by the books. The NBA tampering or anti-tampering rules suggest that teams, players, or coaches cannot approach or lure players on rival teams when they are bound by contracts with their respective teams. This includes publicly stating interest in acquiring the services of a player or by contacting his agent about a possible trade. Which, we could look at that last sentence and, kind of point the fingers at LeBron in that sense. But, it's kind of, but here's the thing. Like, if players, like, and the reason why I think that last part of it, and we probably should get to the salary cap very soon. We've almost spent like a half an hour talking about this topic. But the biggest thing for me here, Pete, all these players share an agent, right? So at what point do these players not be like, are these agents bound by saying, "Oh, I can't tell you what my client's doing"? Like, hey, is Rich Paul really bound by the CBA or like the rules to be like, LeBron, like here's what Anthony Davis is thinking.
Of course he's not.
Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of like
he is on paper. He is on paper, but that's not the NBA's business. The NBA would not make as much money if people like Rich Paul did not do Rich Paul things.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe that. It is a gift and a curse to have this much power to as many people in the NBA as have power, right?
Yeah.
It comes with its benefits and it comes with its negatives, Giving people and the players and the agents as much power as they've done has made the most mundane basketball topic an actual conversation amongst the hardcore fans. That's why we can talk about basketball as much as we do on a channel like this. That's why there's a million basketball podcasts to be listened to. 90% of the time, they're all talking about the same thing, but at least it's a new topic from the last podcast, right? Or the last stream or whatever it is. It's because of people like that who have power and sway to make things happen all year round in a league where that is not technically the way that the rules are written.
Yeah.
So that's where the NBA really needs to make its decision. They really need to make a choice, like in terms of they keep pretending this is a big deal. Are we going to pretend it's a big deal and convince fans it really matters? Because at the end of the day, it really doesn't. It doesn't change where people want to go. It doesn't change the connections they have with friends and family. Because even then, what the grayest of gray areas might be this Brunson situation. His agent was Leon Rose, the front office head of the New York Knicks.
Yeah.
Only a few seasons ago. That is a super conflicting set of interests in terms of these rules and what these guys could have and should have and would have said to each other over the last few years. And even right before Leon Rose left as his agent from CAA. Huge deal. But there's no way to really determine what that means and how you can punish or whatever it is. You know?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, there's so many great areas. We could talk about this for hours, but I want to let you guys kind of comment on this video. What do you guys think about the NBA tampering? Are you for it? Are you against it? If you are an NBA owner or GM and you put your hat on that, what do you guys think would happen? Or what do you guys think should happen to these teams that tamper? Should anything happen? Should nothing happen? We want to know what your guys' comments and opinions are in the comment section below. And please remember to hit that comment, please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Again, all that stuff helps out the algorithm. And again, we do appreciate you guys for that 1,000 subscribers. And let's move on to our next topic.
Bernie, you mind taking just a minute to let me go hit the restroom real quick?
Yeah. And as Pete hits the restroom, we're gonna quickly peep the Twitter sphere and kind of check out to see what is going on. Anything in the let's see here. Actually, let's go to ESPN really quick. Just make sure there's nothing going on. Obviously, we talked about the NIL. Probably another topic for another day. No, we don't want NFL. We want NBA. Obviously, talking about Bill Russell in this past. Harden nice deal in 76ers probe. Obviously, All-Star Harden make official deal. Charles Barkley going to be staying with Turner Sports. That's something that the Live Golf Network was trying to get him in, and so that's kind of an interesting situation from that perspective. Tatum on KD talks. I can quickly talk about this one. So here's what we're going with. Boston, Jason Tatum's response to Kevin Durant's trade speculation says, "I love our team." Doesn't wear the hat, the GM hat. I think Tatum said the right things here because you obviously don't want to upset Jaylen Brown. You don't want to be, egging or poking fun at a guy or maybe not poking fun at, but especially with the trade circulation, like you want to be there as a camaraderie, as a teammate, and not be looked at as kind of like a weird dude because you're like, yeah, I want Durant over my guy Jaylen Brown. And so I think that this was a good idea for him to say, I played with Durant during the Olympics, Tatum said. Obviously, he's a great player, but that's not my decision. I love our team. And so I think it's a good thing for him to say. Obviously, you don't want him to be like, yeah, I would much rather play with Kevin Durant than Brown. Because then it just becomes awkward if that trade never happens. There's obviously going to be some speculations. There's going to be some frustration as a teammate of his. And so I'm glad that Jason Tatum didn't say anything crazy, didn't say anything reckless. And again, I am excited for this upcoming season, depending on what happens. Because I think that if we do keep the same team that we have, I think we could be in for a big treat. More so from the fact of Malcolm Brogdon. And the question really becomes, what does that do for Marcus Smart? Because then it becomes a whole different situation of, does Marcus Smart start for the team? Does Marcus Smart come off the bench? Like, how does that affect his role as kind of like a ball handler, facilitator? Is he going to be a little bit more reckless? Because again, when it comes to Marcus Smart, we know there's always a shot that he never doesn't like, right? He'll always take the shots when they're there. And so I'm curious to see if that'll continue to happen with Malcolm Brogdon there, or will we see an evolution in this stuff? And again, I am excited for the season. I'm excited for Malcolm Brogdon's entrance into this team. The question mark I have, of course, is just making sure that the Celtics are going to be focused really on building this team and really kind of getting back to where we were last year, which was to the NBA Finals and actually winning it this year. Because, like I said before many, many times, we had the opportunity to win that NBA Finals. And again, give credit to the Warriors. They deserve it. But we blew it, in my opinion, in that series. So,
all right, I've returned, by the way.
You returned. Okay. I went on a short mini 3-minute rant on the Celtics, but or maybe not rant.
Just give me your 1 point about the Celtics. Let me hear what you were talking about.
No, I was just talking about more so from Malcolm Brogdon perspective. Like, if he, now that he's on the team, what does that do for a guy like Marcus Smart? Does he become even crazier with the shot selection, or does he kind of realize, okay, I played really well last year, let me continue playing that style? Because the second half of the season, I felt like Marcus Smart found it, and then he kind of reverted back in the NBA Finals. So that was kind of my main concern or kind of talking point for this.
I don't know if I've ever had a bigger change of opinion on a player than I have about Marcus Smart. I really don't know if I've ever changed as much. I love Marcus Smart. I absolutely love Marcus Smart. I think having Brogdon on your team makes him better. Really do. Because I think he totally bought in and understood that that's the best way to continue forward on his career path is in terms of like being successful in the NBA. And realistically, things that Brogdon thrives at are the things that Marcus Smart needs to work the most at. Having somebody who can challenge him in those ways, I think is like, that's super beneficial to a player like Marcus Smart. So I love that signing in general, but even more so, it's kind of like, dude, we talked about it with the trade for KD. I would make the trade if it was Brown and some picks. I would not make the trade if you had to throw Marcus Smart in there. And it's not saying like I think Marcus Smart is more valuable than Jaylen Brown. That's not really my point. It's more, I think he is critical to the success of the team.
Yeah. Are we ready to move on to our main topic of today?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
All right. Let's move on to our main topic of today. And today is more of an interesting one. I brought this up in the chat group with our friend Josh. and of course Pete was in there as well. And I talked about, should the NBA get rid of the salary cap? And the reason why I kind of brought this discussion on was not only because of the soft cap that the NBA has. It seems like the NBA salary cap is going to continue to increase each and every year. At what point does it become stagnant? Who knows? But nevertheless, for the 2023 season, the tax level for this season is going to be 150 million. So obviously, people are going to be paying the luxury tax. We've already had one owner from the Warriors kind of complain about it already. And so from my perspective of it, I think that they should abolish the salary cap, in my opinion. I know, Pete, I think you're on the opposite end of it.
Very much so.
Okay. So let's kind of discuss it, because again, I think it's a very interesting topic, because again, I don't think a lot of people are really talking about it, but I do think it's a very interesting situation to kind of see when it comes to different sports, right? We have the MLB, or Major League Baseball, no salary cap whatsoever. We have the NFL, which is a hard salary cap, so each team is capped at a hard salary, so they can't overspend, they can't go over the cap to keep some guys, and that's what makes the tough decisions. And then, of course, you have the NBA, who has kind of I would say a Switzerland type of salary cap, where it's like, you can go over it, but you have to pay us money. And it's kind of like being in the middle of like not having, well, maybe not in the middle of not having a salary cap, but it's more, I would say, lenient towards the teams to keep all their players. So here is what I would, and the question I would say, like, would it really be unfair to not have a salary cap? The reason why the reason why like I said, I talked about it before. This is my kind of the reason why I am thinking about this a lot more lately is because you think about the players that are getting these big contracts, right? You think about guys like John Collins is a prime example to me. Even Bradley Beal to some extent is also a prime example of players that are getting really big contracts, but to me are not the top echelon type of players. Like for John Collins to get the money that he gets, I really think that he should be a top 25, top 30 player. And I think both of us can agree that he's not that at this current moment, right?
No, not even. No. He's barely in the top 50. I mean, he might be like number 50.
Yeah, even 50, I mean, might be a stretch too, because there's so many amazing players in this league. And so,
yeah, you're not wrong.
And so to me, the reason why I kind of am going the way that I am right now is because I look at it, I see it, and I just think that when you pay that much money, you kind of limit yourself in terms of getting other players. And really what it becomes to me, Pete, is that basically John Collins, depending if he lives up to his contract, and right now, there's trade rumors and speculations going on about him, about Miami Heat, about having him in a trade package to get Kevin Durant. I mean, there's so many things that we could talk about when it comes to John Collins, or even John Collins for Tyler Hero. And same thing for Tyler Hero. You pay these guys the money so that they can become assets for the future, right? In terms of, we can make their contracts and salaries match up so we can get other players, right? So for example, like I talked about, John Collins and Tyler Hero worth the same amount of money. Or let's say, for example, they want to get Kevin Durant. You get John Collins, you get his contract, it's matching up close to Kevin Durant, and then you throw in an extra piece, and then boom, you get Kevin Durant. And so that to me is kind of the reason why I don't think that they should have it, but I want to hear what do you have to say.
I'll start with my biggest overall of why they shouldn't do it, okay? And then I'll give you some compromise solutions. I've come with the
compromise.
Both sides. Come with both, okay?
Okay.
If anything we could use more of in this world nowadays, I think a compromise. I really do. I think there's enough of it. That's a different tangent for another day. My big point, and this is the number one reason why I don't think it's reasonable to get rid of the cap. The disparity between the number one richest owner in the NBA and the bottom is astronomical in terms of their value and the amount of money that they actually have to spend on their teams, right? Steve Ballmer of the LA Clippers is the richest NBA owner. He's somewhere between like 75 billion and 115 billion. We don't really know because, net worth online is almost entirely made up by some kid, right? being said, he is extremely rich. He's at least 3 to 4 times richer than the second highest richest owner, and that is Dan Gilbert of the Cleveland Cavaliers. All right.
Interesting.
Bottom of the list is either KC or San Antonio. In between those two owners are around $400 to $500 million. Their net worth is, like, if you want to use that as a term, just to visualize what I'm saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Universe in which the A has no salary cap. What do you think Steve Ballmer would stop at to win a championship? I mean, we have seen Steve Ballmer, and I think at a certain point, right, and maybe I'm a tangent, it really depends on the personality of the owner too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Steve Ballmer has shown time and time again he is willing to spend money he needs to put his into contention, right? At the same time, we have owners like Robert Sarver, right? The owner of the Phoenix Suns, who is notoriously, infamously, very frugal, cheap man, almost to a flaw. I heard a story about Rajah Bell. Little Rajah Bell. You played for the San Antonio Spurs, but he played Phoenix too. And the story he told on one of his podcasts recently was when he played Phoenix, he was going into free agency. It was a year he ended up signing with Utah, I believe. He had a meeting with Dan Gilbert, and he said, I want to stay in Phoenix, and, I want to come back, right? Mm-hmm. And Dan Gilbert basically said, you know what, I could pay you the amount of money that Utah offered you, but I'm not going to. And Rajah Bell asked him why, and he said, because I don't have to. That's literally what the guy said to him, right? There are owners of teams that do not feel that way. There are owners that say, I have more money than God. I can do whatever I want to do, and I'm going to do it. And I think that if you introduce a situation where a guy like Dan Gilbert, Steve Ballmer, Dan Gilbert might honestly be a poor example. He's kind of a cheap guy in his own right, like certain instances over time. But even then, there, right? He spent LeBron what he needed. I just think there's a lot of teams that would subscribe to different philosophies, and there would be no balance in the league. There would be no balance. You have super team after super team. Here's where I'll get the compromise, Bernie. Maybe this will change your mind just a little bit, right?
Okay.
Why could you not loosen salary cap restrictions in certain facets of basketball business, right? Necessarily have to impact trades, right? Like, I think that's one thing where you could actually start to make the league a little bit more interesting, like what you're saying, right? In terms of making a Collins and Hero trade, and you have to make the salaries match, and it just puts so many restrictions on making moves, kind of maybe de-incentivizes trades in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
You created a situation in which making a trade kind of waives the salary cap for that player in particular for that. I argue that you're going to not only add more trades into the league, which usually trades are a lot of fans' most, favorite part of basketball and just sports in general. Mm-hmm. Even then, salary doesn't matter as much just for that season in that instance, right? Still have to go give up something in order to make that salary move happen.
Yeah. You
can't just say, I have this money and I'm going to spend it however I want, because realistically, the difference between 100 million and 500 million is literally, it's unfathomable. Like, those dudes, if you're $500 million of net worth, you're doing pretty darn well for yourself. But if you have $100 billion, if you have $22 billion, $20 billion, do anything. You have no limits financially. Money, your money makes money. Shout out Biggie, right? I think the NBA would very quickly spiral into, we have 5 to 10 teams with the richest owners, and they compete with each other, and then the other teams might as well be the G League. That's how I feel about it. But it's a tough conversation, It's tough. Like, let me ask you a question, Bernie. When you play 2K, if you play like a career mode, do you turn off salary cap?
I have not turned off salary cap. No, not. I mean, maybe once when I was a kid, but not like.
Let me ask, why don't you do it?
I will. This coming season, we're doing it. No, but I think the reason why
I would say, Okay, no, you answer first.
No, the only reason why I say it's just because of the authenticity of the league itself. So I won't go too unauthentic from what the league rules are in terms of just like playing a video game. Like I know it's weird to say because in a video game you can do whatever you want, but I like the authenticity of just playing it the way that it's supposed to be played, like the way that the league rules are right now.
Sure. Yeah. And I would say that's a pretty common reason, right? That's usually why I wouldn't play with salary cap turned off. But also, like how interesting something is if you can have everything. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like if you're playing your season in 2K without salary cap and you're the richest team in the league, and you can go sign the team and go 82-0, game very quickly becomes not fun. You very quickly do not have any interest in playing. And I really think would be the real life case too. I think players would lose interest. I think people would lose interest in the league. And that
Mm-hmm.
sounds silly because if you threw out a squad of Steph, LeBron, KD, Anthony Davis, and Luka Doncic, right? Because you have no
Mm-hmm.
salary cap, that's really fun for 10 games. But then once
Mm-hmm.
it gets to game 58 and they're beating every team by 45 points, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if there's a lot of people watching who aren't fans of the team playing. You know,
Yeah.
if even those fans, it might just not even be fun for them. So, man, the salary cap is almost like a necessary evil in terms of like it's not fun. It is critical in terms of maintaining authenticity and maintaining fun amongst
Mm-hmm.
longer periods of time within the league.
Yeah. So let
Think about the Warriors, Bernie. Let me ask you this. You know, we have what's his name, Joe Lacob. Is he the owner or is he the general manager? I always forget.
I can't remember. He might be the owner.
It's him. I think it's Joe Lacob is the owner. Regardless, Joe Lacob is the one that was complaining about the salary cap, right? That huge signing to pick up KD, right? And they go on their run and they have this, maybe the best team ever run in the NBA, right? In NBA history. That had such pushback. And even then, they managed to do that within the confines of the salary cap, right?
Yeah.
Having a super team is not impossible within the salary cap rules, which by that standard, I think you need to say, like, have clear evidence of what super teams do in terms of people's happiness with the league, in terms of, how teams are constructed, parity and balance amongst teams.
Yeah.
And even with the rules, it can get out of whack. So what would it be like if there were no rules? I mean, it really would be nutty. It would be too much. Only instance I would say salary cap is we could get rid of it is if the player was just the league was just filled with caliber players, but it really will never be. There's always going to be a difference between the top tier and mid and bottom tier of NBA players. They're all supreme athletes, but there's just a difference in terms of skill set and what your body size is in certain cases. So I know I'm getting off on a little tangent here, but there's not really too much you can do in terms of maintaining balance if there's no money incentives for teams to stay relatively balanced.
Yeah, and really quick, I'm just going to read some of Sean's comments. He said, I think they should just fully switch to a hard cap to make the league more competitive. And he said OKC has an ownership group, and one of the guys is worth $14 billion. FYI, Bennett isn't super wealthy, but his partner is.
Yeah. I mean, sure, and you could do that for a lot of teams, right? You could find like the Knicks. I'll just use them as an example, right? Because I know a lot about the way their franchise works, right? We have James Dolan as the owner, right? James Dolan, his net worth is literally worth less than the building the Knicks play in. Whatever metric a net worth is calculated. Like Madison Square Garden is worth more than him as a person and whatever assets he owns. Does that really mean James Dolan cannot, put a team together and in theory is worth more than whatever his net worth is? No, of course not. He plays in New York. The bankroll of not only him, but the fans and the other people involved in the franchise is worth way more than the $2 billion that he is supposedly worth. still doesn't change much though, because he is the end all be all say determining factor of what the choices they make as a franchise are, right?
Yeah.
As long as you have the ownership groups the way they are and owners who have the actual power within these franchises, like it really will come down to who the richest guy is in terms of who has the most power and say with the franchise, right? So
Yeah. What did you
so much richer than
what
the
did you
rest of
make
the league.
what did you make of Sean's comment though about making it a hard cap instead of just a soft cap, which is what it's at right now? Would you be in favor of that? Hard cap? NFL?
I don't know if I like a hard cap necessarily. Honestly, I think the way it is now, I really do. I don't think it's that bad. Like I get that there's things that could be better about it, but it's never going to be perfect. It never will be perfect. And realistically, I like having a little wiggle room. Like there is a little fun to be had with room that a soft cap provides. Like that does give you the ability to have a super team.
Mm-hmm.
In essence, I get that, like Sean said, it would make the league more fun because everybody would be balanced, but I don't think you can change. This is where we're going to get back to the tampering discussion just a little bit. I don't think you can change where people want to go, like of living and growing their families and stuff. Like you can't change that just by making the league more balanced with some rules. Like there's always going to be ways to move around that, you know, and we're seeing that. Maybe that's what the Harden thing is right now. You know, he's taking less money on this contract, and that is tampering in its own way, right? But where is that? Where is he maybe making more money on the back end, right? And there was all the conspiracy theories about LeBron when he went to LA, what that deal looked like behind closed doors, right? Never know, because we're not rich enough to know, one, but we're also not important enough in the league to know, and they don't care because those deals are always going to be made regardless of a cap, hard, soft, whatever the case may be. There's always a way to get these guys paid. Like the one that is like I always think of is when Dirk with Dallas. And do you remember that when there was Mark Cuban gave him like an absolute astronomical amount of money to make some documentary or something like that? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That's like that was so obvious how much of that was like, here's some extra money because you took less of a deal or less money on deal, right? There was no punishment for that. How could they punish anybody for that? You know, kind of like you get what you're doing, but what are we even going to say to that? You know, it's your business, practically. So, I know I'm getting a little off the packet here with this, but hard thing to rule on. And realistically, I don't know if anybody should do anything the NFL does. I would never copy the NFL on any of their choices, no matter how sound maybe certain things are. I think the cap in the NBA is fine, personally.
Yeah. And here's my kind of like counter arguments too. I think for me, I don't think it would really be that unfair if you think about the way that the MLB has been functioning for the last 20 years. I understand the Yankees are the exception to the rule. They're the ones that spend the most money, it seems like, each and every year, but they're not winning the championship each and every year, right? They like the last when was the last Yankee championship? 2010?
2009. But I would argue baseball is maybe not a good example because the Yankees are not spending the most money. It's the Dodgers and the Astros, and they are the team competing every year.
They're competing now, but I think and they're the ones that they're putting up the money right now. But you could see in the past, I understand you could talk about it, but I think there's going to be parity in whatever there is when it comes to a no salary cap thing. You know, like I talked about, my main point, the reason why I talk about no salary cap is because then it forces the teams not to have to overpay for players that probably are not worth the max, right? We talk about guys like Bradley Beal. If there's the soft or hard salary cap, you have to be forced to pay him that much money. Same thing with John Collins. Same thing with Ben Simmons. Same thing with all these players that you may or may not think are worth the max. And so it kind of gives you a cause for pause of being like, okay, I like John Collins. You're a good player, but I'm going to give you a closer to like 80 to 90 rather than giving you the 120. And I think that, when I look at it and I see it from a different league, and again, the MLB, they're old school, they're rigid, but I like their no salary cap for this reason. It also forces the smaller markets to pay up the big bucks. And that's what they need to do. Like, if you want to be an owner of a league and anything, right? Especially the top echelon, the creme de la creme when it comes to these leagues, whether it's basketball, whether it's soccer, whether it's or football for my European guys, whether it's American football, like no matter what sport it is, you have to be willing to pay up the money if you're an owner. And that's just the way it is at this current point until it stagnates. And I'm not sure when it will. Maybe it will stagnate in the next couple, 20 to 30 years. But I think that it forces, like I said, it forces the Kings, it forces the Jazz, the Pelicans to be spending the money that they need to in order to keep this team. And if you want to be a crappy team with crap, and again, it comes back to, I understand you're going to talk about the money and things like that, but we even had Myers. I think Myers is the GM or the owner for the Golden State Warriors. I think Jacob Layman's the GM, if I'm not mistaken. But Myers, like
Blake is the GM. Yeah, Bob Myers is the owner. You're right.
Like Bob Myers is frustrated with paying the luxury tax. He's not going to want to pay each and every year the top money that it takes to win a championship. And to me, like when you see that from a guy that has had the top of the top players, that makes me think that at some point now other players and other teams and other organizations can get
Bob Myers is the GM. We had it backwards again. It is Joe Lacob is the
all right. Lacob, whatever. He wants to pay the money. Like he doesn't want to pay the money anymore. And so for me, that is where my cause for pause comes from, like having a salary cap or not. Sean, really quick, I'm just going to read yours. It says it's a lot more expensive and hard to build a baseball team, more spots to fill, more cost. NBA would be super easy to build a max contract super team. And that's kind of my thing too. And I, we talked about opening roster spots for this in-season tournament as well, and that can be another discussion for another day. But again, it also gives role players a chance to not just be stuck with the mid-level exception just because, a team is strapped for money. It can force guys like Alvarado, again, who came out of nowhere and signed a really nice contract for him. Like he probably could have gotten more money if there was no salary cap. He could have gotten a little bit extra just for the hustle and effort that he had just in the playoffs alone. And I just think that as much as we talk about salary cap, or sorry, not the salary cap, but the no salary cap would not give parity, I think it does give parity. And again, I know the MLB, we can talk about it being a good example, bad example, but I think it does give the parity that the league wants, right? We talk about the Florida Marlins, the Cardinals. I mean, there's so many teams in the MLB if we look in their 20-year history, just from the 2000s to the 2022s. Yes, the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Astros, they're all up there on the list. But at the same time, you have these other teams that can come in there. And at any given time, if the Jazz draft somebody and they are willing to just pony up the money just to, like, for example, Victor Wembanyama, since he's, going to be the next prospect coming out. No salary cap by the time he's 22, 23, they're going to be paying the big bucks for him. And I don't think that the Jazz would be dumb enough to not offer him the money. And again, you could say, well, he could get lured by by the Lakers, by the Celtics, by the Heat, by these coastal cities. But at the same time, I think the Jazz could potentially keep that kid. And it's the same thing that happens here. You'll always follow the money. And I just think that, for one, if these teams want to be competitive, they have to pony up the money. You can't be stingy anymore. You can't be saying, oh, well, I got alligator arms. I can't pay them anymore. I can't pay the top players the top money. And so I think that there is a way for a no salary cap league to really be the league that I think everybody wants in terms of parity, quote unquote.
See, I would actually honestly sat here. I'm almost convinced myself that maybe a hard cap is the answer. maybe it is. Like, because realistically, Bernie, like if you have, like, let's say next year, and I know this isn't the case, but let's say next year, free cap is removed, right? And then let's say hypothetically to Giannis Antetokounmpo is a free agent.
Mm-hmm.
Situation in which, mind you, every team can throw out their best offer to this guy. There's no salary cap. It doesn't matter who else is on your roster. Your team can pony up as much money as you possibly can to try and convince this dude to come play in your city. Right? the end of the day, there is only ever going to be the 5 richest teams that ever can engage in that scenario anyway, right?
Yeah.
What would stop the Clippers from saying, hey, here's $1 billion. Here's literally $1 billion contract. Come play for the Los Angeles Clippers. Here's a 10-year, $1 billion contract, right? No team can match that. No team. Come up with a contract that no team can match. And there is a team that can pay it because there is that gap of wealth in the league between some of these squads, right? Here's why I've almost convinced myself of the hard cap, right? What if, let me give you a couple scenarios in which the hard cap would actually be nice, right? I've heard people talk about this before, but what if every team had one contract they could say, in some way, maybe this is like what's the tag you get? Franchise tag in the NFL?
Oh, yeah. Franchise tag.
What if there's one salary on every team where you can designate the top player, and every team would probably pick their top player, right? Their most expensive player. That number literally does not affect your cap at all.
Well, I guess the only thing I'd say to that, just really quick, is I think that the rookie extension is that. Because I think it would be...
Yeah, but that's on the low end, right? Like, that actually kind of completely changes the dynamic of how that works, right? Because the rookie is...
the match offer.
Yeah, it's just like, let's say it's Dame Lillard's contract on Trailblazers. That does not affect their hard cap whatsoever. It's just signed to the biggest contract known to man in NBA, and nobody else sees any of their money taken away from them in terms of the rest of the team, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that solves a lot of problems because realistically, that person makes such a huge amount of the cap on their own already that getting rid of it, or the way it would affect the other players and the amount of money they could theoretically make. I mean, it would influence team building a lot, right? Because you could have so many more high-paid players if you didn't have one $50 billion, or in Dame Lillard's case, in a few years, $6 billion contract on your books, right?
Mm-hmm.
I also think if you have a hard cap, that is a really good way to incentivize teams to play harder in these tournaments, right? If the midseason tournament, the win is you get a $20 million bonus on your hard cap, right? Like, that is a huge win in a hard capped league. Any team is going hard for that because that's another solid player to add to the team.
Yeah.
Now, off the hard cap for 1 second, and this is really like maybe where I get the most controversial because I'm going to be a little anti-player, but I don't mean it to be anti-player for every player. It's more, if there was more, I don't know how to put this, but shouldn't it be up to a player like John Collins to maybe realize how much he's worth in comparison to the rest of his teammates, right? At the end of the day, no individual is ever going to do that because that's not how they get to the scenario they're even in. You have to believe in yourself and believe you're worth the world to even have the confidence to get there, right?
Right.
Realistically, how many times, like, let's talk about Colin Sexton, Bernie. This is a good point to bring Colin Sexton up. In no universe at this point in his career is Colin Sexton worth $20 million a year, in my opinion. Most inefficient players in the league, even though he's a talented kid, he can score. He's so inefficient, right? I would never pay $20 million per year for a player like that. However, people would because the money is there to pay him, and because the track record of people in his position getting the money is there. And also, they've been taught that you need to ask for as much as you possibly can because it's a business, right? But realistically, the fact that every person's contract affects everybody else, and these guys can ask for more than they're worth. Like, Draymond is another great example. Draymond getting the max contract for the Warriors right now, in my opinion, is pretty devastating to them in like 2 or 3 years. You know, they're going to lose players if they sign him to a max because they won't be able to re-sign other players who are probably going to be better at a much younger point of their career, right? Is that Draymond's fault? Is that the team's fault? Is that the league's fault? What do you think? I would argue that there is some obligation if you are a team player to say, hey, I'm Draymond Green. I'm not going to score 30 points a game. I'm not that guy anymore, but I'm a really solid dude. Let me ask for a lot, but enough where these other guys can get paid too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard because I think
It's hard to blame him. It's hard to blame him.
because it's just
But there is the
money.
question of if it's his fault.
Is it his fault that he wants that money?
I'm asking more, is there a level of fault to the player asking for way more than what they're worth by the metrics of just about everybody else except themselves and their agent? Does that
No.
come down on a player for asking for more than what they're really worth and putting their team in a bad situation? I would argue it kind of is, but it's not really their fault because I would probably do the same.
It's hard for me to blame them because for me personally, it's the same thing as like when you go to a job and you ask for a raise from your boss. When you think that is the value. Like Draymond, to me, I think he knows that he thinks he's that worth that much. I don't think he's gonna be like, yeah, I asked, I highballed him to see if I can, kind of. It's the what's that strategy in business where it's like you go high and kind of meet in the middle, or like you.
It's somewhere in the compromise zone, but you're really just trying to get that, it's really highballing or whatever you'd call it.
Yeah. The compromise zone where you really shoot really high just for them to be like, well, we can give you a little bit lower. And then you're like, oh, what about this? And they're like, oh yeah, that's fine. And I think that's really what Draymond's doing.
Yeah.
Haggling. And so to me, I can't blame him. I can't blame anybody in life, whether you are a sports player, just a 9-to-5 guy or whatever occupation you're in. If you just say, hey, I want more money, give me more money. And if they say no, that's fine. You move on and you either take the wage that they give you or you move on to another team, which I think there might be a team that might pay that for Draymond. I'm not going to lie to you.
You really think so?
As crazy as it sounds, I think that there are teams that are willing to pay that. Just because.
Now, let me ask you the second question, though, Bernie. Do you think even if a team says we're going to do it, does that make it a smart decision? I really, it doesn't. It doesn't make it a smart decision, regardless if somebody will do it.
It's hard because I've only seen Draymond in the Warrior system. If I could see him in other systems where he's kind of the guy and doing a lot of different things, then I could be like, okay, maybe, he worked here, you worked here, he could probably work there. And and again, it goes probably to a different conversation for Draymond Green is, can he work in a system that's not the Warriors? And maybe that's another video for another day that we do. And I'm actually happy to do that probably next week at some point and have that conversation of like, is he in a different system going to be the same Draymond that we see in the Warriors?
Experiment that we should play is we should take all these guys and however much they're asking, we should play like the Price is Right. Are you worth this amount? Are you worth this amount? And how much would we actually pay you? Is this over or less? Higher or less than what we think you're really worth, right? Because Bernie, I would argue that every single team in the league, if they were presented a max contract, we could pick up Draymond Green, current Draymond Green, the way he is right now, for the most amount of money he could possibly make. I would argue that 30 out of 30 teams would say no. To me personally, he's not worth that much money at this point in his career. I mean, we saw him, mind you, he turned it around in the last few games, the finals, which is when it counts, and they won the championship. I get it, right? He really going to be worth to $50+ million 3 years from now? There's no universe in which that's true. There's just none, unless we have some breakthrough in regenerative health science. Like, there's no way he can do that. It just won't happen. So here's where maybe my point is going to get, people won't like it, but I'm going to say it anyway because maybe it's how I feel. I'm just more speaking out loud, thinking out loud, I guess. Even though we wouldn't blame Draymond, and we don't blame Draymond for asking as much money as he can possibly make, does that mean we shouldn't, Bernie? Like, realistically, because the way that our culture says that you should treat yourself and value yourself, is the question, like, when is enough enough? Like, does that not exist anymore? Like, I think that is a really fair question to ask. With the amount of money that a player like Draymond Green can make in off the court business, is it truly fair and reasonable for him to take that much money away from the lesser players in the team and in the league who would never get the brand deals that he could get, is it fair that he takes that much potential money away from all of them? I would argue it's probably, but the way that the league has been set up in the business and the way we all talk about it has made it okay. That doesn't mean it's okay, though. It just means right now, culturally, it's okay. But the sooner we get away from that, like that's realistically the thing that's the most wrong with the league right now, in my opinion. If you have a player like Bradley Beal, who has by all accounts been a losing player every time he's been the leader of a squad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of the stats he puts up stats like a max player. He does not win like a max player, right?
Yeah.
Is it really reasonable that he makes as much money as he feasibly could by every rule in the NBA just because he can? I don't think it is, man. I really don't think it is. Because then you take away potential money for players who come like a year or two from now who are better than he is, you know, who England's winning more than he does. I really think, if anything, it puts these teams who can't get other players, who only have their draft picks, right? And they have to sign them to the biggest max contract possible. Mm-hmm. It actually puts those teams in a bad situation because by all accounts, maybe not everybody, most people think that the Wizards had to sign Bradley Beal to that max, right? Just because
the market dictates
it's better to sign him and have him on a max. Yeah, it's better to have him on that max than it is to lose him for free. I think that's necessarily would be, because then you're just saying now the Wizards are screwed. The Wizards are screwed because they had to make a choice that most teams would have had to make as well. Is it the right choice to make? I would say, but they had to, business-wise.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes to, and again, I don't want to be like, oh, it goes to my point, so my point wins, but it does go to the point that we're talking about here today, that these players, the market dictates, hey, this guy puts up this many stats, he's on this NBA All-Star or NBA All-NBA team, he needs to get this money. And like you said, is Bradley Beal worth the max? No, because no other team was going to be willing to pay that. You know, obviously the home team has the advantage in terms of they're able to pay the amount of money that they are. But to me, I don't think any team would pay over $200 million for Bradley Beal. Would they pay maybe $150? That's probably more reasonable as to where a guy like Bradley Beal would be. And I think that, again, and I don't want to be like, oh, my point's right, but I think that would be a situation where if you bring it back to the no salary cap, you could see that I don't think that the Wizards would pay over $200 million for him, and I think two, he would go for about what his market value would be. And again, we could agree to disagree on that one, and that's why I wanted to bring this topic up and why I wanted to go from a text message to over here on the charge, because I think it's a very interesting concept that, again, not a lot of people talk about when it comes to NBA news and rumors or even basketball opinions, because it's a conversation that a lot of people don't think about.
Really? So, you know, like, here's my one last thing, right? In terms of maybe a potential idea to make it better, or just something that's maybe more fair, right? And it's something I just mentioned with Draymond in terms of his off the court potential money, right? Mm-hmm. Realistically, you have to understand that there are certain players, like the NBA has to understand, that that there is a small percentage of players in the league that have a marketability that is completely different than 90% of the league, right? And 90% of any player who's ever played in the league, right? That top 10% star, superstar, personality guy, right? Who can get brand deals off the court, right? Why not just say, hey, you can only take so much of this cap from your team, right? We want to make it balanced in terms of, is Dame worth by far the most of any player on his team? Absolutely he is. Making $62 million per year and the rest of your team averages somewhere between like, you know, 1 to 7 million a year. I think that's pretty crazy, especially when Dame is getting Hulu ads and ads for whatever it is, right? Why not introduce a system in which these players can get some marketability on the court individually, right? Like they can have like think of like the way the MMA used to do it. I don't know if they still do this. I don't think they do. They used to be able to have like an ad on their shorts, right? Like Brock Lesnar would have ads on his shorts when he was in the UFC, right? Million a season or whatever it is, right? I don't know why is that not allowed, but he can make 75% of the team's money, and there's guys on the squad that make 200,000. I get that the play speaks volumes, and if those guys were better, they'd make as much money as he does. I get that. There's got to be a level in which, right? What even is fair, I guess, is even another question. I don't know. Maybe that's another conversation for another day. What is fair in terms of these guys making money? How much does Dame being a superstar actually mean that people are coming to see these other guys at all, right? Would anybody be going to see Jose Alvarado if Zion wasn't on the team? Maybe not. That's a good question. There you have to start asking, like, okay, maybe he should make that much more than him. People wouldn't even be there to see Jose Alvarado if Zion wasn't there anyway.
Yeah, and again,
it's a tough question.
It is a tough question. Again, I want to leave it to you guys in the comment section and just, on Twitter or wherever you're finding this video. Let us know in the comment section down below. What do you guys make of all this? Are you guys in agreement with the salary cap, no salary cap? Or would you like it to be like the NFL with the hard salary cap where teams basically lose their star players because of the way the salary cap works? I'd love to know your comments and opinions in the comment section down below. And guys, please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Again, the more likes and the more subscribers that we have here, the more this channel can grow and develop. And again, we are over the 1,000 mark, so I appreciate each and every one of you for being over that mark. And let's move on to our next topic. All right, let's move on to the next topic. And the next topic of today is kind of continuing that topic of the kind of an extension that we're looking at. That is, of course, Colin Sexton. Colin Sexton and the story of him wanting more money. But here is the story that goes on for here. There are multiple people inside the organization that if they had their choice between Caris LeVert and Colin Sexton, they would take Caris over Colin because of the size, because of the length, and because of the versatility that he can bring on the defensive end of the floor. And this is what Chris Fedor said on the Zach Lowe podcast. And they like what they saw with Caris and Darius together. Obviously, the numbers back that up. And that was, of course, via Spotify. And so the question that now becomes is that Colin Sexton is looking at wanting a contract worth $20 million. And the question now becomes, Pete, is Colin Sexton worth the $20 million extension that he is so desiring in his NBA career? Do you think it's worth it?
No. Not at all. I mean, I like Colin Sexton. No. You cannot be, and his stats, and this is the problem, right? His stats would say otherwise. On paper, if you were to look as quickly and just precisely at the important stats, quote unquote, of the NBA, you would say 100%. This guy is still super young. He's averaged over 20 points in of the seasons he's played in the NBA. If you look deeper and dive deeper into those stats and how he gets those stats and what type of a team success those stats equate to, the answer is a big fat no. It's a big fat no. They had their best season of Colin Sexton's career when he was out the whole year. Think about that. How can you get that much of a pay raise if your team just had its most successful year of your whole career and you played not 1 minute of it, right? Because the cruel irony of this whole situation is, even let's say they get Sexton on a $16 million, like let's say they get him on a friendly contract, I would probably still rather play Rubio with Garland on this squad.
Yeah. Me
personally. Saying I would not appreciate having a guy like Colin Sexton off the bench or whatever it is. Definitely not. I mean, he's a solid dude. It's more, he definitely does not deserve $20+ million a season at this point in his career. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough conversation to have, and it continues from our hard cap, no cap salary video that will be out later during the week. I think for me, when it comes to a guy like Colin Sexton, I think that he's shown, and again, we could talk about the stats. He has improved and has kind of been consistent with some of his numbers. Again, shooting, I believe, 37% the year before he got hurt. I think that's a great thing to see. But at the same time, it kind of goes back to the point that you talked about. It's the conversation of, is Colin Sexton good enough to be your number 2 or number 3 option on the team? And the numbers and kind of the way that they play would say no. And I think that, Caris LeVert is getting a little bit more attention. I think a lot of people are liking him as kind of like, they would rather maybe trade Colin Sexton to try to get some assets for him rather than keep him on the contract that he's on right now. And so that's the question mark for me when it comes to a guy like Colin Sexton, is how do you make yourself unexpendable on a Cavaliers team? Because it's hard, right? Because I think JB Bickerstaff likes a certain style, and unfortunately Colin Sexton does not fit that style, which is a long, lengthy, athletic defender, which goes along with the other guys on the team, like Larry Marketing, like Evan Mobley, like Darius Garland. Like Darius Garland is the smallest that he'll go because of how crafty and how much Darius Garland does play like Steve Nash in some sense. That's
very efficient, unlike Colin Sexton.
And that's the problem that a guy like Colin Sexton is going to have is, the Cavaliers, who are up on the up and up, and we have a video out right now talking about, are they Eastern Conference title contenders? That's a question that a lot of people were asking, especially after what happened last season, where they were on a huge rise. They were top 4, and then as soon as the Garland injury happened, they fell back down to earth. But you could also say that maybe if they had Sexton too, they would be okay. But again, it goes back to your point. You're saying they had the best season without him, and so I think that this is going to be a very interesting situation to kind of monitor and continue to look at, because again, I love Colin Sexton. I think he's a good player, but does he bring the emphasis that the Cavaliers need, right? Because the questions that I had, is Dan Gilbert, stats showing improvement in all areas, and the question is, does Dan Gilbert think of his team? Like, does he think that Colin Sexton is going to be worth that much? Dan Gilbert's not really that much of a guy that's willing to give out his money away to anybody. He wants to make sure that you are the real deal, and does having him on the team make the team title contenders? Like, does he enhance that team, or does he kind of keep them about the same where they're at right now?
Well, and realistically, we have to talk. Let's just talk about the Cavs in general. I know you just mentioned it. We have that video that just got uploaded to the Charge. Guys, go check it out. Like, subscribe. Thank you. But let's talk about the Cavs in general, just a little bit more specific right now. Right? Pay Colin Sexton right now $20+ million. That puts you in a situation where you definitely are going to lose somebody in a couple seasons, right? I would argue with what you're building in Cleveland in terms of the size, athleticism, and some of these players. And Bernie, I've been sending you clips all week of some of these clips of Evan Mobley at these camps, working out. And what did I tell you before Mobley even got drafted? The reason I was so high on Evan Mobley was because this is a 7-foot player who can dribble up the court, initiate offense for himself, and he is incredibly underrated as a passer, right? I would argue that paying your guards a ton of money when you have somebody of the potential of Evan Mobley on your squad actually eliminates some of what makes Evan Mobley as amazing as he has the potential to be, right? And you already have Garland. You already have Rubio. I think you have good guards. Maybe I should clear up for Colin Sexton. I think Colin Sexton is probably worth $20 million to a couple teams in the league. And it's a little different than what we were talking about with Draymond, where I said I don't think any team should pay him the max other than the Warriors, probably. Colin Sexton is definitely worth $20 million to a team like Dallas, right? He would be a perfect fit on Dallas. I know that rumor has been out there. Perfect for that fit. But here's the biggest argument for Colin Sexton. A shot chucker, right? He is going to get his shots one way or the other. That has been true his entire career, all the way back to him at Alabama, I believe. He is going to get his shots. Is Colin Sexton getting his shots more important than Garland getting his shots? I would say no. Is him getting his shots more important than Evan Mobley getting his shots? Definitely not. Even Jarrett Allen, is his shot more valuable than Jarrett Allen? I would say 100% no. Jared Allen is incredibly efficient at what he does. He's more valuable in terms of winning. We saw that last season. I just think he is not the type of player this team needs long term. Like, you have all the pieces to build something really special in Cleveland. If anything, this is your guy to go. They can make a sign and trade with him, right?
Yeah, you could do a sign and trade with him and kind of just
100%. That's what I'm doing. I'm getting this guy off the team just because he's valuable, but he's not what you need. What you need.
yeah.
And if I have a guy that's 7 foot and can dribble and pass the way Evan Mobley does, I put him in every scenario possible to develop those skills while he's a young man and let him be the best possible version of himself in 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, this is the question mark that, for Cavs fans, I hope that you're watching this video a little bit later down the line, or, obviously we're recording it so we can put it out later. What do you make of your team? Again, we talked about just a couple years ago where, we were wondering, like, what is their future? What is their, without LeBron James, are they going to be the Cavaliers of old where they're sucking and they're not very good? But, since Dave Griffin has come into the organization, you could see that they're building something here. This isn't just the same old Cavs that are getting, Anthony Bennett and these other bad, first round pick players and really doing a good job of their homework of who they want on their team. And, Colin Sexton was part of that regime of the come up. But you can clearly see that this team has another level to go. And the question mark becomes, do you take Colin Sexton with you to that buildup? I still think that at the end of the day, the Cavs are missing that sort of wing player that can kind of take over from the small forward position. And I know that they play a different style. Obviously, you have guys like Kevin Love and his big contract that you're still paying. Like, that's another guy that you can get off the books. You got
Definitely, yeah.
Larry Marketing, again, good, played really well last season. Jared Allen. You got Isaac Okoro as well. Does Isaac Okoro fit the scheme of things? That's the biggest question mark.
He's kind of that wing guy. It just hasn't always worked out so far.
Yeah, and so to me, as the Cavaliers continue to monitor kind of what they want to do, and I know this is going off from the Colin Sexton extension, but it kind of goes back to it now. What do the Cavaliers do? Do they do a sign and trade? What players are out there for the Cavaliers to go get? Because, again, this is going to come back to that situation. Do players want to play in Cleveland? I think that I'm hoping that we can live in a different time era where if a player sees a great opportunity to see a young, talented team like the Cavaliers, again, timeline. You talk about it all the time, Pete. Timeline.
Yeah.
A player
Yeah.
has to see that there is a timeline here in the Cavaliers and has to look to try to get on this team, because I like what I'm seeing from the Cavaliers, and if they can just add that wing player, whether it's a sign and trade with Colin Sexton or Isaac Okoro, whoever else they could want to trade along with them. If you can get that player, I think the team is going to be really special, man. I am excited for the Cavaliers, and again, they're not even my team, but I'm excited for what they have for the future.
I'm going to be watching a lot of Cleveland
because they have some really good players that I like. So I'm curious to see what the situation will entail for the Cavaliers moving forward. Because again, it comes down to me to, you have Evan Mobley, you have Darius Garland as the 1-2 punch, you have Larry Markin as kind of like the fourth option. There is something there. Now the question is, can they get over that hump? And that's something that I want to ask you guys in the comment section down below of this video and really of the stream as well. What can the ceiling be for this Cavaliers team in the next 2 to 3 years? Can it read the NBA Finals without LeBron James? That's the biggest question mark for me, at least personally.
I think as long as you have a guy like Mobley, you're on your way. Your way.
Yeah, you're definitely on your way. And again, let us know in the comment section down below when it comes to a guy like not Darius Garland. We all know he's worth the money. But more so Colin Sexton. Do you guys think that Colin Sexton is worth that money? Because again, and the other question I want to ask you guys as well, how do you view Sexton? Do you view him as a 1, a 2, a 3? How do you view Sexton in the grand scheme of things, whether he's on the Cavaliers or not? I'd love to know your comments and opinions in the comment section down below. And Sean said, they need a superstar free agent signing. I think that they do at the wing position, but they are damn close to getting to that spot that they need to for being a contending team in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, they're really close. I agree with you. I really think if they got like a really solid wing player, like I would argue somebody like Mikal Bridges from Phoenix is probably a pretty good fit. You know, just defense threes. And this team is nasty. And it really depends on your take on Mobley, just because question would be, do they need another superstar? I would argue they have two superstars. I think Garland and Mobley are well on their way to being like actual stars in the NBA. So
Yeah. And again,
I'm down for it.
let us know in the comment section down below, who do you guys think that wing player is? And please remember, like Pete said earlier, remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Again, all that stuff helps out the algorithm, and we're curious to see if we can get to that magic 2K number. And again, we do appreciate you guys for the magic 1,000, and we'll continue to give you content each and every time. Sexton, to me, has that same value as Brogdon. Okay, Malcolm Brogdon.
I honestly genuinely would prefer to have Brogdon. Personally,
Yeah.
on the contract that Brogdon's on, I would rather have that than Sexton on a 20 mil.
And I think with Brogdon as well, you can kind of also figure with him, he's not going to be a shot
That might be
chucker.
harsh. Dang, man, I keep doing that to myself today. Now I'm questioning that. I mean, Sexton's like 22, right? Or 21.
I think he's 20. Hang on, let me confirm on the.
It's tough, man. Like it really, Colin Sexton is one of the very few players in the league that I would actually argue his value
23
swings. His value swings wildly dependent upon the team he's on.
Yeah.
That's why, like Dallas, he's like a uber version of having Spencer Dinwiddie come off your bench for Dallas, right? If anything, he'd be perfect to go next to Luka just because of the attention he's going to draw, just because he's going to go try and get buckets regardless of if Luka's on the court with him, right?
Yeah.
They could definitely use that. That's a lot of value for that team. More teams where you already have a lot of ball dominant players. He's not. I mean, this is going to be maybe harsh, some people's metric, but kind of like a shorter, dependent version of young Westbrook, right? Like he is going to be reckless and get basket, and he's going to get his shots and get stats for sure. It's just about you have the right players around him to maximize the winning part of it.
Yeah, exactly. And again,
and to be clear, we did. Oh, sorry, I was just
No,
going to say something about Karis LeVert too. We didn't
go
actually
ahead.
really talk too much about Karis.
Let's talk about him. We have time.
Really not that different. I wouldn't pay Karis LeVert $20 million either. I mean, Karis LeVert, actually, I would argue I'd rather pay Colin Sexton than Karis LeVert. I just wouldn't pay either of them that much. My perspective. Like Karis LeVert, I wasn't a Knicks fan and didn't watch as much Julius Randle and RJ Barrett as I do. There is not many players in the league besides Karis LeVert that dribble into double teams and just waste possessions more than Karis LeVert does. There's not many. Like he loves that. He really does. I don't know if he loves it, but he loves putting himself in that situation. So I'm not really big on either of them personally. I thought giving up a first for him was, at the time, I was like, wow, a little wild where you're at. But what are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, it just comes down to, he obviously had those great years in Brooklyn when they had that young team with D'Lo, him, Jared Allen. Again, those were kind of the teams that, we thought, okay, maybe the Brooklyn Nets, they got something there. And then, his career hasn't really taken off to that extent since. We obviously know in this year he averaged 17 a game. But again, my concern about Karis LeVert for me is the 3-point shooting. It's not where it needs to be at least a threat from the 3-point land. And so I think that he really needs to work on that in the future. And again, it just comes down to a lot of different things, but it depends on what your cup of tea is. Are you a Karis LeVert guy? Are you a Sexton guy? I think Sexton gives you a lot more, but what I think Karis LeVert does is a really good off the bench player that can do a lot of damage and kind of in that, maybe not as good as Jamal Crawford, but in that 6-man role, 7th-man role, kind of coming off the bench and giving you those points that you need so the offense doesn't let up. And you can kind of go blow for blow with the other team. And then once the starters come back in, you can kind of do your damage, especially when it comes to the Cavaliers, who are very defensive oriented with JB Bickerstaff and the style that they decide to play with the length that they have. I think it's going to be a very interesting and exciting time for Cavs fans to figure out, what their next move is.
Yeah, and I mean, one last question for Colin Sexton is he's come back from, I believe, a torn MCL, right?
Mm-hmm.
He going to be? That's a big injury, and his game is really predicated on his explosiveness. Like, a really good athlete, very fast. That's just another big reason. Wouldn't get a giant extension right now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's just a good time. I don't ever want to give like the athletic short guard money coming off a knee injury. And is that fair to them? Maybe not necessarily, but it is business. Like we're saying, you have to ration the money. Like we're in a soft cap. Back to our minute discussion. We're in the cap situation, so you need to play accordingly. Build your team. So I'd run this on a wait and see type of basis, like a prove it type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, Colin Sexton has to really come out this next year and play his best basketball. And that doesn't mean you're a shot chucker. That doesn't mean you're taking away possessions and really giving stuff up, especially with the way that the team played last season. Again, they, to me, have the expectations and kind of they set the mark at, okay, we're a top 4 team when fully healthy. And to me, Colin Sexton has to maintain that when he comes back into the lineup. And other players as well, Ricky Rubio coming back from an ACL injury as well. They have to show me that they are willing to be a top 4 team this season for me to be like, okay, Sexton, we'll give you the money. Or, okay, LeVert, we'll give you the money. Because to me, if they can't even do that, that just tells me you guys were not the people that we needed to sign. We need to sign other people. We need to sign guys that fit that mold of, okay, we're not going to let up what we have already right now. And so to me, I'm hoping to see that from the Cavaliers next season, but the question mark now becomes for the Cavaliers, as they, like you said, it comes into it. It's a prove it year for a lot of guys on this team because again, they set the expectations so high before the injuries of top 4. I'm concerned in a sense, and also confident in the Cavaliers of being that team. The question is, do they have the mental fortitude to do it this coming season? Because again, a lot of things could change, right? A lot of teams can now scout the Cavaliers and be like, okay, this is how we beat them. This is how we beat their zone defense. This is how we beat their length, their matchup zone, whatever it is that they're doing. I think that they need to show that they can do it once again. And I know that it's a cliche to say, oh, well, try to prove it again another year. But especially for guys that were hurt like Sexton was, you have to prove it, man. You got to.
Way his team played, he was out. Like that is the ultimate prove it. You got to prove it big time if your team is that much better without you. So, last question for Sexton: does he still have the youngling Padawan braid?
I think he still does.
I'm not signing anybody with that. If you're 4 years into the league and you're still Padawan, bro, no.
Let my guy be a Padawan. Let him be a Padawan.
Just, dude, Padawans don't get $20 million a year.
Only Jedi Masters?
Only the Masters get close to max deals. You don't have anybody who is still in training that level of deal.
And
Thank you.
Let us know in the comment section down below if you agree with Peter's statement, and I'll make sure to make that a YouTube short and a TikTok as well. All right. I think we're on to our last topic of the day, and then we'll kind of get out of here, unless you need to go right now, Pete.
Let's do one more. I'm done.
All right. Last topic of the day is, of course, the Zion fat clause, the weight clause, if you will, to be more politically correct. The weight clause. And this is what the article goes on to say, and then we'll continue to talk about the Zion Williamson. Is this a big deal? Is this a no big deal? And we can kind of tie in a little bit of the football conversation as well as it pertains to Kyler Murray's
Kyler Murray, yeah.
Kyler Murray's homework clause. So let's get into it right here. So the headline: Zion signs a 5-year, $193 million max extension with the Pelicans, and that deal could make the jump to $231 million. However, the fine print of the contract is interesting, as the article goes on to say. There is a weight clause that could reduce Zion's payday if he does not meet the set weight clause. Who has the details? So Christian Clark kind of read the contract. It said here, according to sources, Williamson contract stipulates that he will have weigh-ins periodically throughout the entirety of his new deal. The sum of his weight and body fat percentage must be below 295. If it's not, the amount of guaranteed money in the contract can be reduced. All right, Pete. What do you make of the weight clause? Are you a fan of it? Are you not a fan of it? What is your take on it?
I I don't know if I'm a fan either way necessarily. It's more, I do think it's smart, you know? Like, I think if you're the Pelicans, this kind of only protection you give yourself. You know,
Yeah.
with a player of the caliber that Zion is in a player empowerment era that we're in, this is one of the very few outs you could give yourself. You know, you put it on the player to determine their own success, right? If you want this guaranteed money, you have to do the, like, do it. Staying under a certain weight when you're a professional athlete, making that much money is, I think that's the bare minimum, right? Like,
Mm-hmm. Oh,
stay in good enough shape to compete
Mm-hmm.
with the rest of those players. So necessity for them in the situation and the way things have gone. It's more, how is it it could be handled like the Kyler situation, right? Because all accounts, like, you know, and I don't want to get too deep into the NFL, but you mentioned it, like, we knew about Kyler coming into this extension, really surrounded by the fog of how committed is this dude, this sport, and how committed is he to winning in the team, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not really the question with Zion. It's more the question is, what shape is he in? It's really the same question, but focused on shape.
Yeah.
That if you have a player, and I found it really interesting the way that Kyler reacted to that, you know, that news, right? Because there's no way that contract was signed for that amount of money with his agent, everybody involved, without him about that.
Mm-hmm.
We know that. I don't know if we know that. There's no way he didn't know that was in there when he signed the contract. It's more like, how is the player going to react to the discussion about it, right? And I mean, it's kind of a weird situation, man. Like, that Kyler Murray one is really weird because it's almost less of a necessity for the Cardinals to have put that in their contract in terms of, like, him watching the amount of film he needed. What was it, 4 hours a day?
Yeah, 4 hours a day.
It's less of a necessity because a lot of Kyler Murray's issues are more about his health by the time the end of the season comes around, right? Rather than game film watching, but also not behind closed doors. That's more one of those things that was probably an internal issue that they put in a contract that's publicly facing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean they have to do it publicly facing, otherwise, you know, they think people question it.
The point is that issue that the Cardinals had with Kyler, they wouldn't have put there if it wasn't an issue by their standards, right?
Yeah.
Issue was not a publicly facing issue. The contract, however, publicly facing. So we found out that he was not watching enough film, presumably because it was in the contract, right? The difference here is that we all know that Zion sometimes not in shape, right? That isn't a behind closed doors thing.
Yeah.
We see Zion sitting courtside looking a little chubby around the waist, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no way he can react the way that Kyler Murray did. So I would argue you had to do it for New Orleans. If you're giving this major contract to a guy that's pretty much always injured this far into his career, have to do something to protect yourself. So I think it's smart, and I think that they expose an issue of his behind closed doors to the public like the Cardinals did.
Yeah, I mean, like, if we look at kind of a little bit continuing on to this article, it talks about that, you know, Zion keeps getting less money unless the Pelicans waive him. It also comes here, however, the Pelicans want to send a message about commitment to conditioning, something that has not been always on Zion's top focus. Again, that's a opinion from this article. To put it kindly, there were reports during his rehab, Zion's weight got well above 300 pounds. And, you know, when you're not playing and you're just kind of chilling and you eat the same, and it's what happens to all NBA players and athletes when they go from NFL to their next part of their life, right? I mean, for the most part, guys are getting chubbier because they continue to eat the same way, but are not working out.
Off season.
Yeah. And so to me, like, that goes on to show you that, okay, you know, that's going to happen. And so for Zion, obviously it was going to happen. He's prone to, you know, overeating, and it becomes a situation. I think for me, and hopefully that the Pelicans get this right, they need to make sure that he has a nutritionist with him and really figuring out psychologically. And again, I don't want to get too like doctor, fake doctor over here in terms of like, oh, whatever. But I think he really needs to think about like, why does he overeat? Like, why do you eat at times? Like, for example, like chips. Like, let's say, he's a big chip eater. Ruffles or whatever chips that he's sponsored by. I can't remember if he is. Or even Mountain Dew. I think he's sponsored by Mountain Dew. Like,
that's the one you got to get rid of. Jesus, he's sponsored by Mountain Dew?
He might be, but like, think of like, why do you eat the chips late at night? Why do you do like? There's always the psychological thing, and this isn't just for Zion Williamson. This is for everybody in America because we have an obesity problem that I think a lot of people are not ready to face the fact. But I'll put it out there anyway. That's just my belief. But I just think that he needs to start thinking about like, okay, this is why I'm probably eating the chips and things like that, or like this is why I'm eating this food. And again, it's hard. It's the same thing as studying film. Sometimes for some people they don't have that attention span, but you need to be able to at least make an attempt and really work on that stuff. Because again, Zion Williamson, and the question I have for him too is, are you committed to the Pelicans, or are you still thinking about New York? I still think that in my heart of heart, Pete, I still think he's thinking about your Knicks. I think the Knicks are on his mind right now, and that's probably maybe a good sign for you. But I think that he signed this contract because, hey, you cannot turn down that money. I don't care who you are. But you also are thinking about, okay, how can I get more money? How can I do this? How can I do that? Because I think at the end of the day, he wants to be a well-paid-off athlete. But then, once that contract goes up, he's going to go to New York because I think he wants to be in the Big Apple because his stepdad wants him to be. And so I think for me, when it comes to Zion, he really needs to have he needs to get rid of the yes men that are just like, yeah, you can eat whatever you want. Like, he needs people that are going to keep him on track and keep him from overeating. Because, it's a condition that I think a lot of people don't want to admit sometimes, is that they overeat.
Whoever is manager, you have to start looking at some of these sponsorships, right? Do we want this guy to have a lifetime supply of Mountain Dew? Like, I feel like if I drink one Mountain Dew, I'm on the doorstep of diabetes with just one can of that stuff. Like, maybe not Mountain Dew and Twinkies and stuff. Like, let's get away from that. Get him a Whole Foods sponsorship. Let's start talking some healthy alternatives. Yeah. Regardless, let me ask a question. Does this give him an out with his body?
An out?
You get a way to actually, I'm going to say something maybe not culturally sensitive, but I'm asking ultimately. Does this give him a way to like fatten himself out of a city? That makes sense.
Oh, like the James Harden?
Yeah, but it's contractually written. He can literally gain weight out of the situation he's in, because theoretically, like, it would be a very different discussion if he was 34.
Yeah.
Biologically, I don't want to get too deep into sports and sports biology and all that kind of stuff, and just in general biology. Like, the older you get, the lower your metabolism it is, the harder it is to lose weight, right?
Yep.
He's 25 and he gets, he's purposefully gaining a ton of weight to get out of this contract. Curious if that's maybe a sub-alternative motive of adding that in, right? Like, and negative my way out of this situation by gaining a bunch of weight and still be young enough to go work it off really quick in the ideal situation I want to be in.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that.
No, because I think if you kind of eat your way out of a city, I mean, who's going to really want to pay you? Because then, again, it comes like, that's the elephant in the room, no pun intended in terms of weight. But like, that's the elephant in the room that continues to be a discussion about Zion Williamson himself. You continue to become overweight, and it becomes an issue to where you can't play on the court. Obviously, that was this year. We saw that he was overweight and he was not able to play on the court anymore. And again, it continues to be a conversation with him because he's shown time and time again that if you continue to put on, I mean, it's been the issue since the draft, even when he got drafted, right? A lot of people were like concerned about his weight. They were concerned about
his shoe.
Yeah. I mean, they're concerned about it because at the end of the day, you cannot have that much force put on your knees because it hurts you. It'll continue to build up these injuries, which we saw this year. And you have to be lighter on your feet and you have to move a little bit lighter because that's the way, in order for you to be a dominant basketball player, you have to maintain a certain weight. And if you go over it or under it, you become less and less effective. I mean, look at Shaquille O'Neal throughout his career. If he was able to not gain as much weight as he did when he went from the Lakers to Miami, or even Miami to Boston, or wherever else he went, or Cleveland, I think he could have had a long career. He probably could, to be honest with you, I think Shaquille O'Neal, if he was healthy and really at it, he would have been the top scorer in the NBA history. In my mind, I think he would have been that player. But he chose a different path. He chose a different path, and again, that's on him for doing that. But I want Zion to realize that if you go down the Shaquille O'Neal route where, you're not really taking care of your body, you're eating whatever you want, and doing things like that, it will affect you in the long term. Not only financially, but physically as well. You're going to be out of the league because teams are going to be like, I can't trust you to not put on the weight when we need you to be a dominant player for us.
Yeah, but the problem is like the talent we've seen, and let's just keep it within the next like 2 to 3 years, right? Within reasonable amount of time for somebody re-signing this guy or going out to get him, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's tons of teams that would overlook that if they could get him to be as committed as he possibly could. It's not like New Orleans has been an ideal situation for the bulk of his time there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was throwing theories out like that about him last year. Like, is he gaining this weight? Is he looking the way he is? Because we were seeing videos of him throwing 360 windmill dunks down when he's supposedly too injured to play, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is he gaining this weight to try and just forcibly get his way out of there? I mean, he literally just watched a player of a much higher caliber in James Harden do it. I don't mean caliber like talent or skill-wise. I just mean like the name and how much power he has in the league, theoretically, right, is much higher because he's more established in the league. He literally got out of a situation by gaining weight. Literally.
Yeah.
I think there's a big part of it that is like, was Zion actually just trying to do that? And is this contract a reaction to him doing that last season? Did they understand what he was doing it for, or was that even the reason? Is he actually just a guy that gains a ton of weight really fast, right?
Yeah.
It looks like he is. Like,
yeah.
The question is how much of it was purposeful? How much of it was like, this guy really doesn't want to be here anymore? Because, like, look at the Pelicans. As soon as they started to turn around, he started to look a little bit healthier. He really did. There's a clear correlation between their success and his shape and closer to playing again. So I think there's something to be said. And it says it in that article you were looking at. Like, they apparently did not expect the leak of this clause to come out, Like,
yeah.
Question is, why would they have signed that if they didn't think there was a possibility of it coming out? Of course it was going to get out. He's one of the biggest players in the whole league.
Mm-hmm.
Signing this contract. So
yeah,
I'm not too sure, man. I think that this is kind of like a big asterisk on this. I wonder if they signed it as I don't know, man. It's kind of a tough spot. I really don't think he's going to be with the Pelicans for the entirety of this contract, like you said. And I don't necessarily think that's the Knicks. I just am curious how this ends up unfolding in terms of this part of it in his exit.
Yeah. Really quick, Sean, we'll kind of read your comment. You said, is RJ Barrett going to get a max?
Yes. He should get a max, too.
Yeah.
Different than Sexton.
And maybe we can talk about it on a different video, maybe a little Knicks expose.
Let's call it now, Bernie. Let's plan it for another stream in a few days. Let's do a Price is Right stream. That'll be the whole gimmick. I almost used a swear. I almost used a real swear word on this stream.
You're about to get canceled by the stream.
I held it in. I held my F word in. We'll do a full Price is Right stream with players on, upcoming extensions and players who just got their extensions and people who are rumored to want extensions.
Yeah, let's definitely do that. And again, let us know in the comment section down below, people, what do you make of the Zion contract? Are you a fan of it? Are you not a fan of it? And if so, what do you think could be, what can teams do in order to better suit themselves to really, because again, this stuff is going to come out. People from the Twitter sphere are going to get mad. But I think at the end of the day, the Twitter sphere people are the minority of people. They're not the majority.
They're the loud minority, for sure.
And so they're just gonna have to figure it out. I'm talking about you, Sean, when I say that. But nevertheless,
Yeah.
let us know in the comments and opinions, and let me know your opinions in the comment section down below. Again, new place. I'm feeling crazy right now. More so can't speak today. But like I said, let us know in the comment section down below. What do you guys make of the Zion story? All right, Pete. I have one little quick story that I want to do, and then we can get out of here. It's going to be a really quick one, less than 8 minutes. Dwight Howard could potentially be a WWE superstar.
Oh my God.
So let me read this from Clutch Point. So Dwight has had one of the most underrated resumes in NBA today. Most fans know him nowadays as a solid backup big who can provide good minutes for a contending team. Fans tend to forget, however, obviously Dwight reached some great heights, MVP candidate in the 2010s. Now it seems like he's adding a new thing to his illustrious record, just a different company. Dwight Howard has turned many heads when he participated in WWE's tryouts ahead of SummerSlam. Even more surprised was the fact that the multi-time All-Star seemed genuinely interested in joining the biggest wrestling promotion. I think it's something that's in my future, he said. I love the WWE. I love wrestling. Hopefully one day, the future, I will actually be in the wrestling ring and holding up a belt. That would be amazing. So here's the $1 million question that Clutch Points, I should say, said. Should WWE sign Dwight Howard to a new contract? There's a few reasons, and obviously we can talk about it later. So, Pete, I need your opinion on this. Would Dwight Howard make a great WWE superstar?
My first question is, how fast can he implode the WWE locker room? Is it as quick as the Lakers or the Houston Rockets or any of the other teams' locker rooms he's destroyed? Past that little dig at him. Let me move on. Dwight Howard. Dude, I don't know. By all accounts, he's such kind of a weirdly... Wouldn't you say he's kind of weirdly unlikable? Like, I feel like that is not like an uncommon thing with Dwight. It's not really unlikable in the way that makes somebody like a good heel necessarily. I think if he was in the WWE, it would be interesting. I feel like he's clearly athletic enough. That's not even a question. He's imposing, giant. He'd be a great figure in ring. My biggest question for Dwight would be, does he actually, and that says Dwight has the personality to succeed. I think that's a bigger question than this article is making it. Does he actually have the personality? I'm not so sure. I think it'd be good. It'd be an interesting signing though. It'd be good for them in terms of getting extra eyes on the product, getting people to watch, and realistically having anybody as big as Dwight and as athletically like mobile as he is, dang, dude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like,
get it if you can. Get him if you can. Go.
No, the only thing I was gonna say, like, I think the curious thing about Dwight Howard being in the WWE is, can he be as good as a guy like Logan Paul? And I hate to say that. Obviously, watching the product, Logan Paul surprisingly is pretty freaking good at this thing. Like, he has the WWE down to a T. And again, he is unlikable. People hate him for the YouTube stuff and the Team 10 and his brother as well. But as a wrestler, he has the it factor when it comes to it. I mean, it's like a WWE wrestler I'm talking about, not a AEW or New Japan or any. And again, this is going way off topic for Dwight Howard and kind of our NBA stuff. But I think it's interesting because if we really look at it, I think Dwight Howard can do it. The question mark for me is he going to be too much of the old school WWE Vince McMahon-esque style, where it's big man dominate, Big Show, Yokozuna, all these guys in the past, Undertaker, but Undertaker was a different thing. But like
Brock Lesnar.
The question mark that I have from this is, it could work depending on the angle that they go at, right? Because when I think of Dwight Howard, I think of WWE. I think of NBA player, and someone that is like, Superman guy, the kind of happy-go-lucky Dwight Howard. I don't think of, if he ever became a heel, I would never think of Dwight Howard as like, he's that menacing guy. Again, you can talk about him being disliked, and I think that kind of has something to do with Shaq. And kind of Shaq's kind of keeps digs at him, where it's like, you're.
I don't think that's just Dwight in general. You really don't.
I
think
don't
that's
think
him, dude.
it might be
I think
now
that's him.
because I think there have been some stories that have come out where it's like, yeah, Dwight, you've gone off the rails a little bit.
Yeah, I
Sean,
mean, because even look at like when he was his most famous individually with Orlando, right? And
uh-huh.
he's wearing the Superman cape and
Yeah, yeah.
dunking at the dunk contest.
Hmm.
I don't feel like he was ever super likable by the mass public even then. That was when he had no negative reputation. You know, he
Yeah.
was literally just the guy. I don't think he was ever like a super duper fan favorite. So
Hmm.
I really don't know if he has the personality that it seems that these people think he does. Like, I have not seen that. There's other
Hmm.
NBA players I could come up with that I do think have the personality to do it. And I wouldn't have named him in my top 10.
Yeah. And again, this is just a conversation, just a little something before we end today's stream. Sean, really quickly, you said Logan Paul's the truth. You
I
dang
mean,
right.
he's the truth of something. Truth of
He's,
the end of days, maybe.
he's the truth of the Pokemon Charizard card.
End of day. Let me ask you the last question, Bertie. If you
Okay.
had to pick one player in the NBA right now, who would be the best WWE star? Who would it be?
I think
Whole
Patrick
package
Beverly.
of talking on the mic and just
Patrick
Pat
Beverly.
Bev. I'm gonna name a former teammate of his.
Yeah. Oh, you're
I
gonna
think it's
name
Anthony Edwards.
You think Anthony Edwards
Anthony-
just with the
I
cockiness
think
and
Anthony. I think Anthony Edwards has. He is not only am I just
charisma?
huge on Anthony Edwards in general. He's got the charisma, dude. He would. Have you seen Hustle yet?
No, I need to watch it. I'm
Hustle.
sorry that I've
Your
not watched
homework
it.
by the next.
That's not, gotta get that homework done.
That's your homework because you see how good Anthony Edwards is. He's so good in that movie, dude. It's maybe
Don't
the best performance in NBA star in a movie. It might be better than Ray Allen as Jesus Shuttle.
no. You can't tell me that.
It's a smaller sample size. It's a smaller sample size in the movie, but dude, he's got it. Star. A star. He'd be my pick. Him or dang, dude, you know who I would actually really like to see in wrestling? Dude, what about Robin Lopez? That's a
Robin
weird one, but
Lopez?
he'd be sick.
Dude,
Sick in the WWE. He'd be like a caveman gimmick too.
Dude, he'd be a henchman. He'd be a henchman in WWE. He wouldn't be he wouldn't be the main character. He's an NPC.
Me, I pick Robin Lopez. And here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna make his gimmick like. Have you ever seen Encino Man with Brendan Fraser? He's like a caveman that gets thawed from ice. That's Robin Lopez's gimmick. We thaw him. We found him in the Antarctic, and now he's here to dominate the NBA, the WWE. Excuse me.
He already dominated the NBA. Now he's here for the WWE.
Yeah, now he's here for all the belts.
Here for all the belts. Let us know in the comment section down below who would be the best WWE NBA player if you were to have someone from the NBA join the WWE. We'd love to know what you guys think about that in the comment section down below. But with that being said, Pete, I think it's time to end the stream. Again, appreciate you coming on. Good 2 hours of talking, and when we get to the Price is Right episode, I'll make sure to have the visuals laid out and ready for us. But
So maybe Saturday morning for that.
Ooh, Saturday morning. Okay,
Maybe we'll just throw it out there. Just keep people's interest. Maybe look towards Saturday morning for some Price is Right action.
Yeah. I think that'd be a good topic. That'd be a good time to do it. And again, I would love to know what you guys think in the comment section down below of all the topics that we talked about today. Again, we talked a lot about, obviously we talked about Bill Russell and, his death and the impact that he made for us, just as a community, NBA tampering investigations. We talked about the salary cap implications of having it, not having it. Again, check those videos out when they appear on the live stream or when they appear as videos. And then Colin Sexton's, is he worth the extension? That's the one that we just talked about. Zion Fat Claus and obviously Dwight Howard in the WWE. But with that being said, I would love to know, again, your opinions and comments in the comment section down below. Thank you once again for joining us here. Please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe. Ben Simmons WWE. That would be an interesting one. Ben Simmons.
So we can see him sit ringside for the next 10 years.
The heat that he would get from him.
The commentator. He wouldn't want to wrestle.
But again, guys, remember hit that like, share, and subscribe button. Remember to do all that stuff. Again, the algorithms really are helping us right now. We're on a roll. We're feeling the momentum of the Drew League going forward here. And again, it's all because of you guys. You guys have been with us through thick and thin. Guys like Justin, Tyrese, Pete, my friend group. What's up?
Got to throw Sean out there. I mean,
Yeah,
he's
Sean.
always here, modding.
Sean, the moderator, gotta love him as well, doing his job. I appreciate him. And it's thanks to you guys that we were able to get to that 1,000 subscriber mark. It's thanks to you guys that we can grow this channel into something special instead of the run-of-the-mill channel that no one really talks about. And it's all because you guys gave us the time of day to watch our videos, hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And we want to have you guys continue to do that for us so we can grow even bigger. And again, we're trying to create a community where we can all come to talk about NBA basketball here on YouTube or whatever platform you're watching this. Anyway, guys, like I said, my name is Bernie. Pete, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, Bernie, for having me. Thank you, people, for watching. Appreciate you all.
Yep, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode this Saturday live stream. Peace out, everybody.
Peace.